And for purposes of the recording, welcome you all to session number 2 of our introduction to Kabbalah. And I'm going to go on to the share screen, whoops, and to the PowerPoint. And as you can see, the discussion this evening is a little bit about the history of Kabbalah, but we're really going to focus on some very specific elements of Kabbalah, one being the Zohar, which is the central text of Jewish mysticism, and the 10 Sefirot, which are mentioned in the Zohar, and then a wonderful tool, an interesting tool for interpretation of texts called Gematria, which assigns numbers to each of the Hebrew letters. And one example of how the mystics use Gematria and rabbis use Gematria is how they teach us to tie the Tzitzit, the fringes that are on our Tallit. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to talk a lot about texts. And I mentioned this last time, and again, if you have questions or comments, please chime in. The central idea in I would say in Judaism, in Jewish analysis, in Jewish spirituality, is the idea that the texts come from God and that they are infinitely deep in meaning. So as you'll see, we read the text for a surface reading, but we read then beneath the surface for deeper and deeper and deeper meanings. In one commentary, the rabbis argued that there were 600,000 interpretations to every verse of Torah, with the idea being there were 600,000 witnesses to the giving of the Torah. So once again, as you have questions, please chime in. And if I don't recognize you, just speak up, because I may not be able to see everything. Again, a word from my sponsor. The Jewish Federation of Ventura County is my boss, and I am delighted to be the community rabbi for the local federation, and they do support my work, and I encourage you to be generous to the federation. And actually on my webpage for the classes, there's a link to make donations, and the donations can be made at the website you see here as well. As I mentioned last time, if you would like copies of these slides, and I've updated it a little bit, and I've also made it one slide per page to make it a little more visible. If you go to my webpage, you'll see a menu. On the menu, you will see a link to classes, and a link to classes, a link for handouts, and a link for handouts. I have a PowerPoint presentation that is one session long. The one where we are doing last week, this week, and next week is a 3-session class. I have copies of all the texts that I'm using, and then some suggested reading if you want to dig in further. And then regarding the question about seeing a video of class number 1, if you again go to the website, go to classes, and then there's a description of this class, which you may have seen. And then I've added down at the bottom in blue a link. If you click on that link, you will be taken to a YouTube video of last week's class. So, and as of tomorrow, I will have a video of this week's class. Okay, so very brief history of Kabbalah. As I think many of you know, Kabbalah was always exclusively male. There were no female Kabbalists in history. It certainly there are sacred texts, as we'll see. The Zohar, the central text of Kabbalah, is like 12th century, but there are mystical texts that precede this. It actually beginning in Second Temple times, with a mystical tradition of contemplating God's throne. In the book of Ezekiel, there's a very mystical depiction, fanciful depiction of God's throne, and also God's chariot, which is called the Merkabah. Some of you, maybe Israelis, I don't know if my Israeli cousin is in the room. The Merkabah now is an Israeli tank. That's what it's called, and it comes from the biblical word for the chariot. And so one of the traditions that's very old is the chanting of Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzavot, Melech Haaretz, Kivodo in the Kedusha. That comes from the book of Isaiah. And there's a continuing history. A very powerful movement was the Hasidim, which is not the same as the Chabad and their friends. That's going to be a few hundred years later in medieval Germany. But there develops this idea in this movement of a chassid who is ascetic, serene, and altruistic. So it's one of the few Jewish mystical traditions which embraced sort of departure from the world, deprivation, fasting, sitting in snow, being very uncomfortable, but never promoted sexual abstinence because, as I think I mentioned, Kabbalah begins with being a traditional Orthodox Jew and focusing on the commandments, the mitzvot of Judaism. And one of those commandments, in fact, the first commandment in the Torah is pru uvru, be fruitful and multiply. But the goal always is to deepen one's connection with God. So now I want to get into a little bit of the central text of Jewish mysticism, which is the Zohar. Here is a pretty common translation. It's the Sensino translation. So the first thing you can see is it's not a small book. There's a lot of material here. This is a traditional page of Zohar. This says Sefer HaZohar. The word Zohar means radiance or illumination. And this is a particularly interesting copy here. I'm going to hold it up for those of you who can see my face. So this is it's called the Pritzker edition, and a great scholar of Jewish mysticism, Rabbi Daniel Matt, would write small books, and some of the material that I'm going to be reading with you is taken from those smaller books, where you have a good translation of Zohar material with lots of footnotes explaining what's going on, because as you'll see in a second, it's very abstruse and very difficult. And so it must be well over 20 years ago, 25 years ago, a wealthy woman from the Pritzker family approached Daniel Matt and said, what's a good translation of the Zohar? And his response was, there really isn't a good translation of the Zohar. Okay, so if those, please try and keep it down because there's lots of people in the room. He said there isn't a good translation of the Zohar. And so her reaction was, why don't you write one? And he said, for me to write a translation of the Zohar would take 20 or 30 years of devoting, my full time to it. And she said, terrific, I will fund it. So that's what he's been doing for the last 20 or 30 years. And there are now 12 volumes like this, I think 12 volumes like this, which are quite good. And he does online teaching. And, it's a very, very good translation and also a wonderful commentary. So when I say it's a little difficult, a little more about the nature of the Zohar. The Zohar is a work of pseudepigrapha. Pseudepigrapha, believe it or not, is an English word. It is the opposite of plagiarism. In plagiarism, you copy someone else's work and you claim you write it, right? In pseudepigrapha, you write something and claim someone else wrote it. Now, why in the world would anybody do that? Well, if I write a little book, it might be a terrific book. Actually, I've done this. And I can tell you, I've sold 5,000 copies of it. It's a book for Christians about Judaism. If, on the other hand, I find an ancient text, the true story of Moses, and people really believe that Moses wrote it, that book is really going to sell. Okay, what I'm going to do, because of background noise, is I am muting all of you, and you can unmute yourself if you have questions. So this book, the Zohar, reads as though it was written by Shimon Bar Yochai, a 2nd century Common Era Mishnah teacher. And it's written in the Aramaic of the period. And Shimon Bar Yochai, actually, his yortzeit was, well, is today, or it began last night. It's observed on Lag BaOmer, if you know about that holiday. But scholars agree that it was actually written in the 13th century in Spain by Moshe de Leon, either himself or with his school. And we see examples of 13th century Hebrew and even medieval Spanish creeping into the text. And also mention of some scholars that weren't alive when Shimon Bar Yochai was alive. And actually, I came across an interesting discussion of this. And of course, a traditional Kabbalist, or even your local Chabad, Rabbi Chabad, is heavily influenced by Kabbalah, would say, actually, the story is that Rabbi Akiba taught Shimon Bar Yochai a mystical way of summoning the prophet Elijah. And so Shimon Bar Yochai summoned Elijah. There's a story that I really ought to research more, that the secrets that Shimon Bar Yochai learned was so powerful that everything he looked at would burst into flame. So he buries himself in a cave with his son for 12 years and is able to summon birds to bring him food. And during this period, Elijah dictates the Zohar to him. But because the people of his age did not merit receiving the Zohar, they decided to keep it a secret for 1,000 years. So it's only until 1,000 years later in Spain that it actually gets written down. So those are the two stories, but scholars would agree that it was written in the 1200s in Spain. It is structured as a commentary on the Torah. And once again, I'm going to come back to this idea. The assumption in these texts is that all wisdom is contained in the Torah. In fact, what the mystics would say is the answer to every question that will ever be asked is contained in the Torah. And you just have to know how to tease it out of the Torah. You need to know how to dig into the Torah to get these true, deeper understandings of the Torah. And so the Zohar, if you glance through the pages of the Zohar, it's organized by the Torah portion. So it's a mystical commentary on the Torah portion, each of the 50, I guess it's 53, 54 Torah portions. It's written in Aramaic because that's what the rabbis of 2,000 years ago were writing in. So the commentary on the Mishnah, the bulk of the Talmud, is written in Aramaic. And in it, we read of a brilliant rabbi of 2,000 years ago wandering the Galilee with his disciples. Does this sound familiar to anyone? I know you're all muted, so you can't necessarily respond. But if you think about what was going on in Spain at this time, there was tremendous harassment of the Jews by the Spanish. So one speculation here is that one response to this is, oh, by the way, we had a brilliant rabbi wandering the Galilee with his disciples 2,000 years ago also. It provides a structure to the study and practice of Kabbalah. It introduces the 10 Sefirot, which we will get into in a moment. And it's very difficult. So how difficult? Here is a description of the moment of creation. And I'm going to read it. At the head of the potency of the king, he engraved engravings in luster on high. A spark of impenetrable darkness flashed within the concealed of the concealed. From the head of infinity, a cluster of vapor forming in formlessness, thrust in a ring, not white, not black, not red, not green, no color at all. As a cord surveyed, it yielded radiant colors. Deep within the spark gushed a flow, splaying colors below, concealed within the concealed of the mystery of Ein Sof. It split and did not split. Its aura was not known at all until under the impact of splitting, a single concealed supernal point shone. Beyond this point, nothing is known, and so it is called Reshit, beginning, first command of all. And in Danny Matt's translation and commentary, this is accompanied by 3 pages of 13 detailed footnotes. So you get a sense for this text and how difficult it is. And of course, in the original, it's written in Aramaic without any punctuation or vowels. Let me pause and unmute everybody. Anybody have any questions or comments so far?
I got a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Of course. This guy that was wandering the desert 2,000 years ago.
Wandering to Galilee. The Galilee is very lush. It's not desert.
This guy that was wandering the Galilee.
Mm-hmm.
Was that Jesus Christ?
Well, the Christian version is Jesus. Our version is Shimon Bar Yochai.
Oh, okay.
Okay, that was the point. That in some ways, the historians say that one of the stimuli for a 13th century Spanish rabbi to write a mystical text about a great rabbi wandering to Galilee with disciples is an imitation of Christianity. So the people that promote Kabbalah believe that there is a mystical value to the Zohar. So as I say, here's a little Zohar. Here's the book that I show you on the screen.
Very cute.
It's very cute. It's a Sefer HaZohar Pinchas.
Yeah.
The Kabbalah Center is the author, Rav Berg. And I just want to read a little bit from the inside of the book. It's a book of great mystical power and wisdom, universally recognized as a definitive work of Kabbalah, and is so much more. The Zohar is a wellspring of spiritual energy, a fountainhead of metaphysical power that not only reveals and explains, but literally brings blessing, protection, and well-being into the lives of all those who read or peruse its sacred text. This pocket-sized Zohar is the portion of Pinchas, the book of healing, which gives us the privilege and the opportunity to connect to the light of healing and protection wherever we go. All that is required is a worthy desire, the certainty of a trusting heart, and an open and receptive mind. And on the inside, just a page or two in, is a little text that I'm going to actually take the liberty of doing this.
Thank you.
It talks about the 72 names of God. Now, I looked at this text carefully, and none of these look like any of the names of God. You know, like Adonai or Elohim. And so I did a little research on this. It turns out in some of the verses in Exodus, where just before Moses splits the sea, there are 3 consecutive verses that each have 72 letters in each of the verses. Okay? So what they did, I'm gonna mute everybody because I'm getting feedback from that's distracting to me. So what they did to find the 72 names of God is, I think this is the way they did it, but it's a formula like this. The Vav here is the first letter of the first verse. The Hey is the first letter of the second verse. The Vav is the first letter of the third verse. This is the second letter of the first verse, second letter of the second verse, third letter of the second verse, and so on. And supposedly, these 72 names have the power to overcome the laws of nature and the laws of human nature. And if you want to see what the text actually looks like, at least it has vowels here. Yeah, it's a little hard to see. But there's no English in this little booklet. It's all Aramaic. And then I looked online from the description of the book at Amazon.com. And this is a good description of what I would say mystics think about simple possession of these books. It is said that just owning the Zohar can protect you and aid in your healing. You do not need to know the Hebrew. In fact, it's Aramaic, it's not Hebrew. In fact, most of it is so condensed that you cannot read it. The 72 names of healing can be scanned, however, and can elicit the energy of healing. It is a beautiful small book that can fit in your pocket, glove compartment, purse. The gold lettering is expertly done. See how expertly done it is? Pinchas is a section of the Zohar that involves healing, protection, and blessings. The energy of this small book is transmitted into your soul. Into your soul. It is like owning a piece of the Torah. Do yourself a favor and bring to yourself the energy and the light of Zohar. So to me, this is classic magical thinking, that just by owning the Zohar and this book and carrying it around with you, it will do you a lot of good. Any questions about that? I'll unmute you. Yeah. Or questions?
Sefirot.
Like
Sorry, is there a question?
well, no, it's just good. It's Jared. It's like a talisman in a sense.
Yes.
You
Yes.
know, and combined with a little bit of a marketing pitch for a product. Okay.
Oh, yeah. If you go to the Kabbalah Center's website, you will find magical water and red strings and a whole bunch of stuff. And you can, to become a member, it's like it's $40-something a month. And
so my comment was just for those who are not inclined to buy that. Sefaria has a pretty good Zohar there.
yeah, I haven't really looked at the translation. My guess is Sefaria is using a pretty standard, probably the Cincino translation, but I'm not sure.
I believe it is Cincino. It's not Daniel Matt's, which is
Right.
far superior, I agree.
Yes.
But you know what? It's online and it's free. So
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
sorry.
And as you can see from the text that I read, even having a good translation kind of leaves you bewildered to try and understand what in the world are they talking about. So for me, it's very helpful not only to have a translation, but to have Daniel Matt's commentary. Okay.
It reminds me a little bit of the same kind of aura of magical thinking that surrounds homeopathy.
Okay. I don't know a thing about homeopathy, so I'll take.
Okay, well, then no, I won't derail.
Yeah, but there's a lot of. I would say, I would call it magical thinking. Now, magical thinking can work. I mean, there's something called a placebo effect. The other thing is, there are people, and there are, mainstream religions these days, such as Christian Scientists, who actively reject medical treatment in favor of prayer and spiritual treatment. I don't believe that the Kabbalists rejected medical treatment. But as we were talking, I can't remember if we spoke about it here or in one of the other sessions. It's only fairly recently that there was such a thing as medical treatment. You got sick, there may have been things that they would do for you, but we now know that almost none of them would work. There was certainly a sense in Judaism of washing your hands and keeping things clean that could prevent illness, but there wasn't much that they could do for you if you were ill. So in a way, it's not surprising to see this kind of magical thinking.
Lewis Thomas, famous doctor and writer, talked about in his essays about medicine and about how it wasn't until mercury treatments for syphilis that doctors actually had a hope of curing anything. All that you could do in being a doctor was simply to learn how to diagnose and be able to tell people what was going to happen to them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Very important topic here, the Sefirot. It's a word that comes from the word for counting. So once again, we talked about this a little bit last week. The idea, I'm sorry, Erwin, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I thought before the Zohar was written, Rabbi Shimon wrote a book called Torah Hasod, and the title was The Secret of the Torah.
Okay, I'm not familiar with it. You may be right.
Okay, well, and I wondered if that was a abbreviated edition of the.
Well, I mean, the Zohar doesn't appear until 1,000 years later. It may well be that that's another name for the Zohar, and I've just never come across it, but I don't know.
Okay.
A very important concept is the Sefirot. And if you buy anything relating to Kabbalah, you will see, I've got 3 different images here. You will see an image that looks like this, kind of a tenfold representation. And, I think I've told you I've been studying this for 25 years. I've probably read almost 100 books on the subject, and I'm still, pretty much bewildered by much of it. Here is what I understand about the Sefirot. When we read in the Torah that God is created, that humankind is created in the image of God, that must tell us something not only about humanity, but it must tell us something about God. So what I think is going on with the Sefirot is this is the way humanity this is the way in which God's structure represents a human structure, and that's illustrated by the image here on the right. So there's a hierarchy of Sefirot. The singular is Sefirah. And I think about it, my understanding of it, it's the way God relates to the universe and the way God relates to humanity. It's very common in the Jewish world to kind of look down upon Christianity and the Trinity by saying, well, they're not really monotheistic. They really have 3 gods, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But if you talk to Christians about the meaning of the Trinity, and I often point out there's 43,000 different Christian movements, and they will have different explanations. They will, as I understand, that idea is the idea that God relates to the world and to humanity in 3 different ways. So we go 7 better and would say that God relates to humanity in 7 different ways. At the very top is Keter, which means crown. But this is often also referred as no thing, not nothing, but no thing. There is no thingness to this. It is without form, without any substance, and it's unknowable. It's so high, so distant from the world, it's unknowable. And then there's a kind of an upper 3 to the Sefirot, the highest 3. So you have Keter, which means crown, Chachma, which means wisdom, and Bina, which means understanding. And Chachma is a point. It was the point that was talked about in that rather complex discussion of the Zohar. So God, to enter and communicate with the world, begins with a point. And you can argue, or you can think of it as either phallic, or you can think of it as a seed. And I think that's the way the Sefirot is discussed. The point is a seed. And where does the seed need to be planted? Into a womb of Bina. So Bina is the feminine, Chachma is the masculine. The seed is planted in the womb, and then she gives birth to the other Sefirot. So you can see how all of these are interconnected. And so you have on one side love, chesed, right arm, there's colors, there's people associated with these. On the left side is power, gevurah, sometimes called din or judgment, left arm, and they're in balance too. There's a tension between God's aspect of love and God's aspect of power. And then down here, we have netzach, prophecy or eternity, and splendor, hod, and in the middle, teferet, which is beauty, rachamim, which is kind of loving kindness or compassion, the blessed Holy One, the heaven, the sun, the harmony, king, and the color green. And then down, getting closer now to the earth, we have yesod, a foundation, a tzaddik, the righteous one, covenant, because the covenant is the connection between earth and God, and a phallus, a penis. And then Down at the bottom, we have the word Shekhinah. So you may be familiar with this word. In biblical Hebrew, Shekhinah simply means the presence of God. And in fact, in modern Hebrew, the word Shechana means neighborhood. And Mishkan is the temple. I think Mishkan Tefillah is the name of the New Reform prayer book. So she is the queen. So there is very much the imagery of God's masculine and feminine aspects here, and the importance of Yesod and God being joined with Shekhinah. Shekhinah is God's presence on earth, which is connected to the heavens when things are going well. But when things are not going well, such as the fact that the temple is destroyed and we're in Galut and we're in the diaspora, it's as though Israel is sent off into diaspora, and God so loves Israel that God sends his queen, his feminine presence, with the Jews into the diaspora. And one of the things that we're always striving for is to get God and his Shekhinah together again, get God's masculine and feminine aspects to join again. I almost hesitate to ask this. Does anyone understand this?
No, question. Question.
Yeah.
You're
Yes.
allowed to ask questions.
Yes.
Huh?
Because if you did, I would ask you to explain it to me.
All right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yes.
Shekhinah is female.
Yes. A lot of this is female. I mean, I think,
Ina is female.
yes.
Keter is supposedly God.
Keter means crown,
Okay.
and it's masculine.
Okay.
Chochmah
Now
is female. Bina is
I have-
female.
What?
Well, Chochmah and Bina are both female also. The other thing is there's a lot of discussion of the 7 lower Sefirot, and they actually correspond to the 7 ancient planetary objects.
Oh.
I got a
Jay?
question, Rabbi.
Yes.
You'll notice in each one of these diagrams,
Mhm.
okay, the graph is substantially different between the three.
Yes. The
the-
connections are different.
The connections
Yes.
are extremely different.
Yes.
And what are all of the implications of the connections, and why are there the differences between these?
I am sure there's a good answer to that, but I don't have it. The one in the middle is the one I'm taking from Danny Matt's book, which shows more interconnection than these other two. And I
Yes,
have to say, I never
exactly.
even really noticed it before, but I am certain that the idea is that these are all interconnected. But I don't know the answer to your question. It's a very good question.
Yeah, because in the leftmost, the
Yes.
Tiferet does not connect directly to the Keter.
Keter. Right.
Yes, and
Yep.
whereas you have a direct connection in the other two.
Yes. And interestingly here too, Shekhinah is not directly connected to any of them. So
Yes.
I don't know what's going on there, but it's a great question. Any other questions before we go on? Okay.
Neil has a question.
I'm sorry. There were actually hands up. Yeah. Sorry, Neil.
Yeah, sure. I have a question. Actually, I have 2 questions. So when you're, if you're counting the Omer, which direction are you reading the Sefirot so we know what week we're in? What Sefirot week we're in?
I can show you a chart, but
It's not clockwise or counterclockwise.
I don't recall. I'm pretty sure it goes. It's the 7 lower Sefirot. I think it starts with Chesed. I know Hod is 5, so it's probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But I'm not sure. Then 6 and 7.
And my other question, thank you, is I'm looking at a picture of the Sefirot that I have, and between Keter and Tefirot, there's a sphere on mine called Da'at.
Mhm, mhm.
I don't know if you can see that. It's called Da'at.
Why don't you hold it up to the camera and say something, and then I can pin you and take a look at it. So say something first.
Well, that Sefirot between Keter and Tefillah is called Da'at. I don't
Yeah.
know what that is.
Well, da'at is knowledge, and chachma, bina, and da'at, if you take the first initials of them, it's Chabad.
Okay. I was just
There are
gonna say,
three words for knowledge,
Hmm.
and if I had to guess, I would guess the text you're looking at is a Chabad, is the source is Chabad.
Okay, thank you.
So that's not a great answer, but it's the best I can do at the moment. Okay, and now I need to fix something, and I don't know how to do it. Okay, this is weird. Okay, I need to pin me. Okay, sorry. Okay, moving on. And yeah, so the purpose of this is just to show you the Sefirot. So when you see it again, you will recognize it. I have read, a lot on this, and it talks about a male side and a female side, and it also talks about the flow from Keter, which is unknowable. The three upper Sefirot are unknowable. The lower Sefirot is how we relate to the world, and you will find other diagrams that will have, Isaac is one of these, and David is one of these. I mean, it's in the description in the Zohar. There's just a lot going on. I want to jump to the world of Gematria. And the basic idea in Gematria, it's a tool. It's like a secret decoder ring, okay? So the idea of Gematria is it's a way of decoding some secrets in the text.
Oh.
And you will be familiar with a little bit of Gematria. And the basic idea is the numbering system, which still is the numbering system in Hebrew. If you're looking at a Hebrew, Hebrew Bible, and you're looking for chapters and verses, depending on where it's printed, when it's printed, you may find the chapters and verses printed with these letters rather than with, I'm not sure what we call these ordinal numbers. So Aleph is 1, Bet is 2. If you go through the alphabet, you get up to Yud, which is 10. And the next letter, Kaf, is 20. So it's not 11. So if you wanted to say 11, you would say Yud Aleph or Aleph Yud, would both stand for 11. And then it goes by tens till you get to 100, and then 200, 300, and 400. So one of the limitations of this system as a mathematical system is it's really hard to get bigger numbers. Another system is try multiplying and dividing with these guys. And I know you're unfamiliar with this, think about multiplying and dividing with Roman numerals. It's the same weakness. So the idea of our number system is genius. But the Bible isn't written in the number system. It's written in Hebrew. So an example with which most of you will be familiar is the Hebrew word chai, meaning life. So you have chet is 8, yod is 10. So the numerical value of chai is 18. And many of you will know, it's tradition actually in the Ashkenazi world, not so much the Sephardic world, that when you make gifts and things, you do it in units of 18. Everybody with me so far?
Yes.
So I'm going to show you one of the ways this is used in tying tzitzit. Tzitzit are the fringes on the edge of a tallit, of a tallis. So you can see what a tallis looks like. Here is, I actually still have it in the bag because it's a big tallis. The nice thing is that I tied these with blue thread. That's actually a separate discussion, but you can see the knots are similar to the ones you see here. You can inspect your own tallit, and if it's tied in the Ashkenazi fashion, you have a double knot at the fringe, at the corner, 7 coils wrapped around, another double knot, 8 coils, another double knot, 11 coils, another double knot, 13 coils, and then another double knot, and you have 8 threads of the tzitzit. Okay, everybody with me so far?
Yeah.
So if you look in the book of Numbers, we're actually told the reason notwithstanding Tevye's puzzlement, we're actually told the reason why we're supposed to have tzitzit. We are told that when we see the tzitzit, we will remember the commandments, and our hearts will not be led astray. I'm going to mute everybody again, just to cut down a little bit of noise. So the question is, what in the world do these knots and things have to do with commandments? And by the way, as I think I may have mentioned, this is the Ashkenazi way of tying the tzitzit. I'll actually mention the Sephardic way in a little bit. And if you have questions, use the virtual question thing. Okay, so the Gematria of the Tallit and the Tzitzit. So here is the Hebrew word tzitzit, Sadi Yud Taf. Sadi has a value of 90, Yud has 10, there's another set, and Taf has 400. So if we add all these up, we get 600. There are 5 knots in each tzitzit, and there are 8 strings in each tzitzit, so they add up to 613 mitzvot. Everybody with me? And oh, no, you can't respond because I've muted you all. But as you probably know, that Jewish tradition, Jewish rabbinic tradition, counts 613 commandments or mitzvot in the first 5 books of the Bible. Anybody have a question? Well, let me just finish this page, and then we'll see if there's any question. But as it says on the infomercials late at night, wait, there's more. The first group of windings is 7. That's the number of days of creation. The second group of windings is 8. That's the number of days of the covenant, till Brit Milah, the covenant of circumcision. So the sum of the first 2 groups is 15. That's the first 2 letter of God's name. God's, the Yud He Vav He, Yud is 10, He is 5. The third group is 11. That's the last 2 letters of God's name. And the fourth group is 13. That's the value of Echad. Aleph is 1, Chet is 8, Dalet is 4. So the total of 39 windings is the Gematria of Adonai Echad. And I think you will remember from last week, Adonai Echad is the central statement in Kabbalah. The idea that God is Echad, God is unity, God is the unity of the universe. I showed you last week a little book that I have called The Many Meanings of the Word Echad. It's an entire book with 25 essays on the meaning of the word Echad. The essay written by Larry Kushner, who is a Kabbalist, a teacher of Kabbalah, talks about this idea of the unity of God. And a little more about the meaning of Echad. Aleph, Chet, Yud. Aleph, 1, the 1 Tallit. Chet is 8, the 8 strings per tzitzit. And Dalet is 4, the 4 corners of the Tallit. So, any questions?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Who came up with this?
Rabbis.
I'm serious because
Okay,
this is driving me crazy.
but let's think about this. It says tutzai tzitzit, which are fringes, at the corner of your talit, with the idea that they will remind you of the commandments. Well, if I just have a bunch of knots, if I just show you this bunch of knots, or if I tie it any old way, it doesn't have this underlying significance. So the rabbis say, we are going to tie it so that if anybody asks the question, how does this remind me of the commandments? They pull out their laptop and PowerPoint and they show you the slides that I just showed you.
What rabbi?
What rabbis?
Yeah.
This was already in pretty early Talmudic times.
Your name?
I don't know the name.
This is kind of comprehensible to me that they would do this because, they're actually seeing that the Torah encodes all of the meanings in the universe, so that they're used to seeing things encoded.
Yeah, and
so,
also just very simply, they want to make the 613 commandments in there. Mm-hmm. We have a flag of our country, right? Yep. And our flag, there are flags. Many countries will simply have a few colors, right? Our flag is pretty complicated. It's got 50 stars, one for, each state. And as you know, we increase the number of stars and we add states, and it has 13, stripes for the original 13 colonies. So exactly in the same vein, the rabbis are doing the same thing with the Tallit. But wait, there's more. And let me just back up a second. Yeah, there's actually more on this. In the Sephardic way of tying tzitzit, instead of 7, 8, 11, and 13, they do 10, 5, 6, 5, which are the letters of God's name. Yud, He, Vav, He, because they're more focused on the mystical idea of God's name rather than focusing on the commandments. So if you look carefully at your tallis that you may have at home, see if it's 7, 8, 11, and 13. If it is, it's Ashkenazi. And if it's 10, 5, 6, 5, it's Sephardic. I did this with a rabbi friend of mine, and she was stunned because she never knew her Tallit was a Sephardic Tallit. Okay, what I am showing you here is a page from this book, which is a traditional Siddur, an Orthodox Rabbinical Council of America Siddur, Art Scroll Siddur. So this is it's called an Iyun Tefillah. It's a meditation that they recommend, and they say, many people will say, in this case, before putting on the Tallit. And they say, L'shem Yichud. That word echad is in there. I didn't include the Hebrew because this is small enough to begin with. For the sake of the unification of the Holy One, blessed is He, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and His presence. The word for presence is Shekhinah. It would be Ushechinato. For the unification of God and His Shekhinah in fear and love, in Yirah and Ahava, to unify the name Yud K with Vav K in perfect unity in the name of all Israel. So if we look at the commentary here, to unify the name, the first half of the divine name formed by the letters Yud and He symbolizes the attribute of judgment, while the second half formed by the letters Vav and He symbolizes the attribute of mercy. And then we're talking about blending these. The main thing I want to point out here is this name is so holy that they won't even write in English Yud He and Vav He. They write K instead of He to avoid even coming close to blasphemy. Moving on in this little prayer, I am ready to wrap my body in tzitzit, or tzitzis in the Ashkenazi way. This is an Ashkenazi prayer book. So may my soul, my 248 organs, and my 365 sinews be wrapped in the illumination of tzitzis, which has the numerical value of 613. So the rabbis conclude, they compute that the important organs, don't ask me for the list, 248, is equal to the number of positive commandments, while 365 sinews equal the number of negative commandments. And this symbolizes that the number 613 and the commandments are in the very structure of our body. This symbolizes the principle that man was created to perform God's will. Telling you this, I'm just trying to give you a flavor for the way the Kabbalists approach this material. Okay, moving on to other secrets of Hebrew and secrets of Torah. I'm going to mute you guys again. Even the shapes of the letters hold secret meanings. So consider the Hebrew word for truth, emet, in the Ashkenazi pronunciation, emes. Each letter is well balanced. Look at the aleph. It has two strong legs it stands on. The mem has a nice solid base and another letter, and the taf also has has a leg and another little solid base. And if that weren't enough, the Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. The Taf is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And the Mem is right in the middle, in the center of the Hebrew alphabet. This is a balanced word because truth is enduring and balanced. Now consider the word for falsehood or lie, sheker. I'll admit I chose the font to emphasize this. But shin is sort of wobbling around, unbalanced on a round base. Kuf is even worse. It's a ballerina standing up on her toe. And resh, also unbalanced, also on a point. And shin, kaf, and resh are the three next to last letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So the mystics are even going to get clues from the shape and the balance of Hebrew letters. Okay, next huge topic. The mystics and the Kabbalists speak of 4 levels of spiritual awareness, the 4 Olamot, the 4 worlds. And what they're talking about here are 4 levels that we can perceive living in the world. And in each of those levels, our understanding of God is somewhat different. This is from Rabbi Green's book, Arthur Green's book, A Kabbalah for Tomorrow, which is really pretty good. And good in terms of, maybe after only a few readings, you can begin to understand it. So at the lowest level, we have the world of asiyah, doing or awareness. This is the world in which we live our lives and understand our own separate identity. It's the world in which, my freezer has just failed and I'm waiting for a part to come in. It's the world where I have to do my laundry. It's in this world we perceive God as a transcendent other outside ourself, the object of yirah, fear and awe, as a trusted and loving king. So that's in the very basic world. We're living our day-to-day lives, and we understand God as a king that we are in awe of and a little bit or a lot of fear of. At the next higher level of spiritual awareness, it's the world of Yetzirah, formation. In this level, we begin to lose our sense of separateness, recognizing that there are higher forms of life or deeper rungs of perception. God is perceived as a loving parent who knows and loves us fully, who accepts us with all our shortcomings, but who also cares enough to make demands upon us. The symbol of the world of Yetzirah is an angel. To Yirah is added Ahava, love, in our relationship with God, who becomes Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. And of course, Avinu Malkeinu, high holidays, a supplication of prayer, a begging for forgiveness. So here, I kind of highlighted some of the keys here. The emotion and the relationship with God in Asiyah is fear and awe. King in Yetzirah is love and demands and a parent. The next level is Beriah, creation. Beriah, Beriah, I guess. Here we begin to see the great vision that there is only one reality, there is only one. Love is the dominant motif in the relationship between God and person. God as parent is replaced by God as lover, a la Song of Songs, which is really erotic love poetry, described by Rabbi Akiva as the holy of holies among the scriptures. And he also goes on to say that anybody who thinks it's just a bawdy, erotic song has forfeited their share in the world to come. I am in that category, sorry. At this stage, we give vent to our longing for reunion with the source, the embrace of our soul in the arms of the beloved. I hold fast to him and will not let him go until I brought him to the house of my mother, into the chamber of her who gave me birth. The Zohar is a key source for insight into this world. In this world, however, there is consciousness. There is the consciousness that I am still present. I am the one who is perceiving this reality. And remember, I talked about the idea of mysticism as a desire to become one with God. I want to cleave to God. There's a concept called dveikut, which comes from the same Hebrew word as the word for glue, devik. But there's still a sense that it is I who want to cling to God. So there's a me and a God. Here, the relationship is erotic love, and the relationship is a lover. And then finally, atzilut, which is flowing. In Green's words, Rabbi Green's words, here the lines of self, lowercase, and self, uppercase, no longer exist. Macrocosmic universe and microcosmic mind are a pair of mirrors that stand opposite each other. They reflect one another so fully that any attempt to distinguish between them has to be left behind. In Atzilut, there is nothing other than an emanation of or flow of divine grace. We no longer speak of love between self and God because the word between no longer exists. You are no other than God. Within the human mind, Atzilut is usually present in brief moments, in flashes of insights that pass quickly in themselves, but remain with us in memory to light the rest of our lives. Okay, everybody understand that?
No.
Okay, welcome to Kabbalah. So again, I'm just mentioning this to point out that if you do any reading in Kabbalah, you will see diagrams of Sefirot, and there will be lots of references to the four worlds. In fact, you know, I know that when we've talked about this with Erwin, he has quoted some of his rabbis, Hasidic rabbis, and the world of Chabad is heavily dominated by Kabbalah. The Hasidic movement in general, and remember, there are 20 or 30 different Hasidic groups, only one of which is Chabad, but they're heavily motivated by Kabbalah. So they will be speaking quite often of this idea of the four worlds. So I just wanted to give you a, you know, just a brief insight into the four worlds. Any questions that people want to raise at the moment? Okay, let's move right along. Let me close this up. Okay. Now I'm confused. Oh, sorry. Okay, so I'm going to mute everybody. Okay. Names of God. This is kind of interesting, and I put this diagram back up because there's a reference to it. And again, this just gives you an insight as to how all of these concepts are connected. So two main names I'm going to comment on here. This is also Arthur Green, as Adonai and Elohim. Adonai is the name we say when we read God's name, Yud He Vav He, in a Torah or prayer book. It literally means my Lord. It's actually in the plural, which is another interesting subject. And it is said because the actual name was only pronounced, the word Adonai is said rather than trying to pronounce God's actual name, because the actual name was only pronounced by the high priest in the Holy of Holies in the temple on Yom Kippur afternoon. Traditional Jews will not say or write even Adonai except when when reading the Torah from a scroll or actually praying. The mystics see meaning even in the shape of these letters, which now shouldn't surprise you. The name Yud He Vav He embraces the entire Sephirotic world. The smallest letter, Yud, represents Chachma, the primordial point, the beginning of existence. Remember, nothing is knowable about Keter. The tip of the Yud points upward, and then the rest of it points downward, hinting at Keter. So there's a hint of Keter, an essence so elusive that it cannot be captured in writing. The first He grammatically depicts an open structure. A He is an open box. It's Bina, the primal female into which Yod enters. I talked about that a little while ago. Vav stands for the number 6, representing the 6 forces centered on Tiferet. Here there are 5. I think Keter is probably, no, I'm sorry, here, I think they're counting these 6. I'm not sure which, actually. It also represents an elongation of a Yud. If you look at a Yud and a Vav, Vav is an elongation of the Yud, thus becomes a phallus-like embodiment of male energy within God. The second He, again female, is the home of Vav, the Ark of the Covenant, also home for the soul. The numerical value of the name 26 is the subject of much comment. For example, both the words ahava, love, and echad have the value of 13. So loving oneness join up to make the name of God. This is pretty important for you just to know. Hold on, Robin, you have a question. You need to unmute yourself, or I can unmute you.
Can you please make these slides bigger because
Oh,
I
yes,
can't read
yes,
them?
yes, sorry.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yay.
So then you can't see the Sefirot, but that's okay. As a reminder not to pronounce the name of God when reading the Bible or prayer books, the rabbis wrote the vowels for the word Adonai into the text, Yod He Vav He. If you try and pronounce the word as it's written this way, you would get Yehovah, from where we get the mistaken pronunciation of Jehovah. So we don't know how to pronounce this name. I can't remember if I talk about this in the next class, but it's definitely not Jehovah. The people that think God's actual name is Jehovah never got the memo of the reason why the Masoretes put these vowels in. And then Elohim is a generic word for God, used to describe both God and the false gods in the Bible. Although the form is plural, the Torah, it's used in the Torah is grammatically singular. I can talk about that if you're interested. Again, in Green's work, the point is that Elohim in this context is being used as a collective. All the powers that once belonged to the deities of the pantheon, love, power, wisdom, war, fruitfulness, and all the rest, are now concentrated in the single being who contains them all. The mystics often assign the name Elohim to God's aspect of judgment, because another meaning of the Hebrew word Elohim is judge, and the name Yod He Vav He to God's aspect of love. The balance to the names is found in the Shema, where we read Shema Yisrael, Adonai, Eloheinu, Adonai. Eloheinu is found between the two repetitions of Yod He and Vav He. Robin, do you have another question, or are you still from before? I'm going to lower your hand. Okay, moving right along. I want to read a bunch of texts. I love these texts. Some of them are long, but I think they're amazing. This is from Moshe Cordovero. When powerful light is concealed and clothed in a garment, it is revealed. Though concealed, the light is actually revealed. For were it not concealed, it could not be revealed. This is like wishing to gaze at the dazzling sun. Its dazzle conceals it, for you cannot look at its overwhelming brilliance. Yet when you look at it, when you conceal it and look at it through screens, you can see it and not be harmed. So it is emanation and clothing. By concealing and clothing itself, so it is with emanations, these Sefirot. By concealing and clothing itself, it reveals itself. This one is by Cordovero. I'm not sure. I think they're both, but I'm not certain. With the appearance of light, the universe expanded. With the concealment of light, the things that exist were created in all their variety. This is the secret of the act of creation. The one who understands will understand. So with the appearance of light, the universe expanded. At the beginning of the Big Bang, very shortly after the Big Bang, the density of the primordial atom got to the point where light could escape the gravitational field of the initial explosion, and yehi or, there was light, and the universe is expanding. But it's pure energy. Once that light dies down a little bit, and we start to get suns and stars and planets, then the light can condense, the energy can condense in the form of matter. So I'm actually pointing out a sort of a coordination between these mystical texts and astrophysics. Okay, another 4 levels of understanding Torah, because all that stuff was too simple before. You will hear this a lot also. So again, the reason for me covering these things is really because as you start reading some of these texts, or even reading articles about Kabbalah or even reading Torah commentaries written by, Chabad or mystics, you will see these words being used. So there is a word pardes, which means garden or paradise in Greek. And the rabbi said there is actually a story in the Talmud of the 4 people who entered the garden, who entered paradise, and 3 of them kind of went nuts, and I think it was only Akiba that managed to maintain his sanity and exit. So Pardes is an acronym like NASA. The Pei stands for Pshat, the simple meaning of the text. So the idea is that there are 4 levels, at least, when we read any text of Torah, we read it at least at 4 levels. So the Pshat is the simple meaning of the text. The Garden of Eden, the story of Noah, what happened, make a Sunday school, golden book out of it. That's the story. And it's a pretty simple story. And the rabbis, I think in the Zohar, but certainly mystical tradition, said there clearly has to be more, because we could have made up better stories than the Pshat of these stories. They're fun and they're interesting, but if that was the only depth to the text, we could have done a better job, writers ourselves. Shakespeare does a better job than some of these stories. So the next letter is a resh, which stands for the Hebrew word remes, which means hint or allegory. So now we're going to take a deeper look at some of these texts, and we're going to ask for the allegorical meaning. So the example I mentioned here is the sea splitting and people crossing is a birth allegory, okay? The Israelite people are being born, and they're being born from where? Where are we coming from? Mitzrayim, which is the Hebrew word for Egypt. But what is the literal meaning of the word Mitzrayim? Narrow places, just in case you didn't get the hint with the waters parting and people coming through. We're also coming through a narrow birth canal because Mitzrayim stands for narrow places. So that's an allegorical meaning of the text. Simple meaning, sea splits, we came through. Allegorical meaning, there are hints of birthing involved. The Tallit stands for drash, which is related to the word, which is the same root as the word for midrash. Midrash means to look at words very carefully and draw out meaning from the words and the choice of language. So an example I talk about a lot is when Cain murders Abel, God asks him, where's your brother? Cain famously says, how do I know? Am I my brother's keeper? God even more famously says, your brother's blood cries out to me. And I've never seen it translated as anything but that. But the word is actually in the plural for bloods. There's a little yud added, which makes it plural. So the rabbis using midrash, say the reason it's plural is what God actually heard was not only Abel's blood, but the blood of all the descendants of Abel that would now never be born. And so in the Talmud, they discuss this and they derive the lesson that if you murder someone, you have destroyed a world. And if you save someone, you have saved an entire world. And I think, I don't know if it was today or yesterday, I was talking about this. But at the end of the movie Schindler's List, you have, modern day, a bunch of people passing by Schindler's grave and putting stones on the grave. And the people passing by the grave are not only the people that Schindler saved that are still alive, but all of their children and grandchildren, and I don't know at the time of the making of the movie if there were great-grandchildren. Because Schindler did not only save those people, not so few, but he also saved all of their descendants. So by a simple one letter, the smallest letter in the Hebrew alphabet, by the process of drash, the rabbis draw this lesson out. And then there's the samach stands for sod, a secret meaning. And we talked about this last time. The Bible begins with the letter bet to give a bunch of secret meanings. The fact that there are 2 Torahs, a written Torah and an oral Torah, and the fact that you can only go in the direction of the Torah. Let me unmute you and ask if there's any questions on this.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
So why, if if every time someone is murdered, then the whole world is destroyed, why is it okay for the Hebrews to go to war?
Because they're not murdering, they're killing.
Well, what's the difference? Is the same?
I'll tell
the
you.
world
The commandment reads, "Thou shalt not murder." Lo tirtzach, not thou shalt not kill. So I always love to ask this question: has anybody murdered today? Any of the class attendees? Hearing none, I sigh with relief. Have any of you killed today? Anybody brush your teeth today?
Yes.
You killed hundreds of thousands of God's precious, sweet bacteria who are very happily living in your gums, and you killed them. Mass killing this morning.
Happy to hear that.
The war, a just war, is not considered in Jewish law to be murder. It is definitely killing. I mean, you know, harvesting the carrots is killing you. You're killing those carrots. So that's the answer. It's not murder, it's killing. You're not allowed to murder. In certain cases, you're actually commanded to kill, such as in a just war or in self-defense. Any other questions or comments or challenges? Okay, let me mute again. Okay. So more text. Let's see. I love these texts. Sorry. The essence of Torah. There was a man who lived in the mountains. He knew nothing about those who lived in the city. He sowed wheat and ate the kernels of wheat raw. One day he entered the city. They brought him good bread. He said, "What's this for?" They said, "Bread to eat." He ate and he tasted it, and it was very good. He said, "What's it made of?" They said, "Wheat." Later, they brought him cakes kneaded in oil. He tasted them and said, "What are these made of?" And they said, "Wheat." Finally, they brought him royal pastry made with honey and oil. He said, "What are these made of?" They said, "Wheat." He said, "I am the master of all these things because I eat the essence of these, wheat." Because of that view, he knew nothing of the delights of the world. They were lost to him. So it is with one who grasps the principle and does not know all the delectable delights deriving and diverging from that principle. The idea here is, if we only read the Pshat, we think we understand the entire Torah, but we haven't gone through the various levels. So this is from the Zohar, and it says here in the Zohar, wheat and its products apparently symbolize the 4 levels of meaning in the Torah: simple, midrashic, allegorical, and mystical. And he goes into a discussion of that. And there's another story from an earlier midrash that Danny Matt quotes, and he said a king had 2 servants. Let me try and make this a little more visible. And he loved them with a complete love. He gave each of them a measure of wheat and a bundle of flax. The wise servant, what did he do? He took the flax and wove it into cloth. He took the wheat and made it into flour. He sifted it, ground it, kneaded it, and baked it. Then he arranged it on the table and spread the cloth over it. He left it until the king arrived. The foolish servant did nothing at all. After some time, the king came to his palace and said, "My children, bring me what I gave to you." One brought out the bread on the table covered with a cloth. The other brought out the wheat in a box with a bundle of flax on top. When the Blessed Holy One gave the Torah to Israel, he gave it to them as wheat from which to produce bread and flax from which to produce cloth. So the idea here is God wants us not just to guard the text, but to take the text and make a lot more from it, to take the wheat and make bread, to take the flax and make cloth and make a beautiful Shabbos, rather than simply guard the text. And the rabbis love to explain things by means of parables. Okay, here's my favorite story in the Zohar. And I'm certainly not a master of the Zohar, but I adore this story. I'll make it a little bigger to make it a little easier to see. A little bigger. Okay. Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yossi met one night in the Tower of Tyre. They stayed there as guests, delighting in one another. Rabbi Yossi said, I am so glad to see the face of Shekhinah. For just now, the whole way here, I was pestered by an old man, a donkey driver, who kept asking me riddles the whole way. I've taken out the footnotes from this story because they're even longer than the text. But the idea is when two people discuss Torah or holy things, the Shekhinah, God's presence, dwells among them. And the donkey driver is often someone of incredible wisdom whose wisdom is not perceived. So the donkey driver asked the riddle, asked actually a number of riddles, but the one that I'm interested in is this one. Who is the ravishing maiden without eyes? Her body is concealed and revealed. She comes out in the morning and is hidden all day. She adorns herself with adornments that are not. All this he asked along the way, and I was annoyed. Now I can relax. If we, me and this other rabbi had been together, we would have engaged in words of Torah instead of strange words of chaos. I'm just going to move something around. Rabbi Yossi said, of all the words I heard you say, I've cut out a bunch of material, there was one that really amazed me. Either you said it out of folly or they're empty words. And the old man said, which one is that? He said, the one about the ravishing maiden. Human beings are so confused in their mind. They do not see the way of truth in Torah. She calls out to them every day in love. Recall the word Torah is a feminine word. But they do not want to turn their heads. She removes a word from her sheath. It is seen for a moment, then quickly hides away. But she does so only for those who know her intimately. A parable. To what can this be compared? To a beloved, ravishing maiden hidden deep within her palace. She has one lover unknown to anyone, hidden too. Out of love for her, this lover passes by her gate constantly, lifting his eyes to every side, knowing that her lover hovers about her gate constantly. What does she do? She opens a little window in her hidden palace, revealing her face to her lover, then swiftly withdraws, concealing herself. No one near him sees or reflects, only the lover. And his heart and his soul and everything within him flow out to her. He knows that out of love for him, she revealed herself for that one moment to awaken love within him. So it is with a word of Torah. She reveals herself to no one but her lover. Torah knows that the one who is wise of heart hovers about her gate every day. What does she do? She reveals her face to him from the palace, beckoning him with a hint. Then swiftly withdraws to her hiding place. No one there knows or reflects. He alone does. And his heart and his soul and everything within him flows out to her. This is why the Torah reveals and conceals herself. With love, she approaches her lover to arouse love within him. Come and see the way of Torah. At first, when she begins to reveal herself to a human, she beckons with a hint. If he perceives good, if not, she sends a message calling him simple. He's pshat. He's only seeing the pshat. Torah says to her messenger, tell that simple one to come closer so I can talk to him. He approaches. She begins to speak with him from behind a curtain she has drawn. Words he can follow until he reflects a little. This is drasha. Then she converses with him through a veil that's riddled with allegory. This is Haggadah or Remes. Next, let's see, I need to make. She says to him, do you see that word, that hint with which I beckoned you at first? So many secrets there, this one and that one. Now he sees that nothing should be added to those words and nothing taken away. Now the pshat of the verse is just like it is. Not a single word should be added or deleted. Human beings must become aware, pursuing Torah to become her lovers. The old man was silent for a moment. The companions were amazed. They did not know if it was day or night. If they were really there or not. Enough, companions. From now on, you should know the evil side, the Yetzer Hara, has no power over you. I, Yeva Sarah, the old one, has stood before you to awaken your awareness of these words. They rose as if awakened from sleep, and they threw themselves down in front of him, unable to utter a word. After a while, they began to cry. Rabbi Chia opened up and said, "Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm," from the Song of Songs. "Love and sparks from the flame of our heart will escort you. May it be the will that our image be engraved on your heart, as your image is engraved on ours." He kissed them and left. When they rejoined Rabbi Shimon, this is Shimon Bar Yochai, and told him everything that happened, he was delighted and amazed. He said, "You are fortunate to have attained all this. Here you were with a heavenly lion, a fierce warrior, for whom many warriors are nothing, and you could not recognize him. I am amazed you escaped being punished by him. The Blessed Holy One must have wanted to save you." He called out these verses from him, and now again quoting from Proverbs and Isaiah. "The path of the righteous is like a gleaming light, shining ever brighter until full day. When you walk, your stride will be free. If you run, you will not stumble. Your people, all of them righteous, will inherit the land forever. Sprout of my planting, work of my hands, in which I glory." I think that's the end of this story. Yes, and the end of our session, at the end of the material I wanted to cover. So I'm going to stop the sharing. And so the idea here is, what is sexier and what is more erotic? A woman walking naked in the street, or a woman clothed in these flowing veils, sort of hidden, and only revealing herself a little bit to someone standing, we might say stalking, outside her gate, waiting for her to just open, the lattice window a little bit, and they are just struck dumb. And then she goes back. And then the next day, if this guy is still there, she might open it up a little wider. "Have I shown you my veil lately?" And close. Well, he spends another 2 or 3 days standing out there. He might get invited in for tea. That's the image the mystics have of Torah. And the word is Ohavei Torah, those who love Torah. When my wife Sonia, who is a natural mystic and has studied none of these texts, we were serving a congregation, a small congregation in Ojai. I should have a picture of this. They wanted to have a white Torah cover, a mantle, for Yom Kippur, and they didn't have one. So Sonia said she would make a mantle. And she made it look like a Moroccan belly dancing. Several layers of veils embroidered in silver, and so on and so on and so on. And I said, this is amazing, because this is the first truly Kabbalistic Torah cover I've ever seen, because it's the first one that looks feminine. The Torah is a ravishing maiden, okay? It should have a sexy gown. It should have something that really, is erotic, in my opinion. And my wife got this because she has a closer communication with the Holy One of Being than I could ever dream to have, because I'm still lost in the left brain study rather than her mystical insights. So I adore that story, because that explains my I would say erotic, using that term in its highest sense, connection with Torah. My connection with Torah can't be explained by simple left brain logical interest in the subject. I like physics and I like reading about cosmology, but my connection with Torah is on a different level. And the mystics are presenting that as a hint. So my understanding of what's going on with the mystics is they are explaining poetic truths. And that makes sense to me because I understand it poetically. But again, they will say, no, they're taking it quite literally, some of these stories. Now, how they deal with the story in the Zohar. But I think what's going on in the Zohar here is giving you a flavor for what you just might be missing if you're just looking at the Torah's outer cover. If you're just reading the story, you're missing a lot, okay? And she is not going to reveal it to you. If you're sitting there waiting, saying, okay, tell me what's so great about this. You know, I would say, you know, you're a peeping Tom. You're not a lover. You want a sneak peek at what's really going on. I've never said that before, but I like it. You want a sneak peek at what's going on, but she is not going to give it to you. She wants to see if you really love her. If you really love her, you will spend time, you will spend energy, you will shower gifts, the gift of your attention, the gift of your passion, the gift of your intellect, not to mention dues for the synagogue, upon her. And then if she feels like she's being well cared for, she might reveal a little more. I need to take a cold shower. Any questions?
Lovely, lovely, lovely. Thank you.
Rabbi, I have to say, I mean, tomorrow at 9 a.m. we have our weekly Parsha meeting, and you have now challenged me big time.
Yeah.
So that I have to, when I introduce this, I have to unravel the mysteries and the beauty of this ravishing woman.
It takes a lot of work. But what's surprising about that? You know, so to me, that story, the ravishing maiden, gives a glimpse at what the mystics, or even just Ohavei Torah, lovers of Torah, are getting out of Torah study. Some people are at least electronically following their rabbi around the country, right, Cheryl? And staying up late at night to take these classes. Cheryl is in, I know you're in the East, you're in Jersey, right?
Jersey.
Yeah. So any questions? And you know, it's 8:30. It's been an hour and a half. So any questions before we break? Next time we're going to be talking about Lurianic Kabbalah, the creation of the universe, simple stuff, and how to be more spiritual in your life. And I may sing a song to the tune of Achy Breaky Heart that I wrote studying some of this material.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
So I was talking with my cousin.
Rabbi.
I don't see her on the call. I have an Israeli cousin, and I was about to leave her. I came up with a pun that I'm very proud of for the new age of Zoom. I was going to say goodbye to her, and I said Lahit Ramot. So
that's right. That's very good one. A
perfect
good one.
ending to remote study Lahit Ramot until next week.
Laila Tov.
Yeah, Laila Tov.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank
you.
See you tomorrow morning.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. And I do have office hours every day, as I think most of you know. Okay, bye.
Bye.